Welcome to another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. And you can learn more about that at teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Today, my guest is Bryan Rutberg. He is the hippie with an MBA. He's also a motivational speaker who once helped a marketing GM prepare a speech for a data analyst audience. So he must know the geeks pretty well. I'm really curious to know how that presentation went, but I'm even more curious to find out about his speaking business, marketing, sales, prospecting, all of it. So let's get into it. Welcome to Teach the Geek interviews, Bryan.
Neil, good morning. It is great to be with you, and hello to our audience. Looking forward to sharing a little bit with you, and I hope to get to know you in return.
Wonderful. Before you became a speaker, Bryan, what type of work did you do?
I worked with the geeks to some extent. When I was in college, I had a job where I discovered technology. It was back in the days around the time that the first IBM PCs were introduced and started to be popular in the workplace. And I found I had a gift for making the little things do what I wanted them to do. And after a couple of jobs after undergraduate school, and then deciding that this English major, the hippie side of me, needed an MBA, I came out and I worked always on the sales and marketing and relationship building and communication side with big technology companies. I was at HP. I was working on the tech with technology people at McKinsey and Company, and then the last 6 years of my corporate career were at Microsoft. And in every case, I needed to kind of flip the script and sometimes talk to the technologists about what business benefits came out of the technology. I needed to take my business clients and help them understand why technology could be good for them. So I feel like you and I are sort of two sides of the same coin. My gift was always being able to make technology approachable for the non-technologist.
The people who are watching or listening to our conversation, Bryan, and they have aspirations to be a speaker, I suspect the first thing they need to figure out is what they're going to speak on. So, how would you
Yes.
suggest somebody come to that decision on what they speak on?
Yeah. S- Sit with yourself for a while and ask what really makes you passionate and motivated. So much so that you know it so well that you can process what other people need to hear about it and make it approachable for them. So, where is your true passion area? What gets you excited enough that you want to spend the time to develop content? And by the way, go out and figure out where you're going to get audiences and how you're going to get them. And if you're not doing it under a corporate banner, how you're going to actually get someone to pay you for it. Uh, but if you are in a job, if you're in a salaried role or some sort of a sales role, say, and you want to step up inside your organization and start speaking with audiences of customers and influencers and partners, then raise your hand and talk to whoever makes those decisions about what it is that inspires you and what you have to share and what the business benefit is going to be back to your organization. It's not enough to want to speak. You've got to have an end state in mind that brings benefit to the audience, to you, which presumably is the part you've already found, and to the organization that you're serving.
Yeah, I totally can see that. Certainly, if you're working for some place and you want to continue to, or you want to speak in front of others, perhaps the money isn't as important as if you were, on your own. But even in the instance where you're working for somewhere, you could be passionate about something, but if there's no market for it, then you can be passionate about yourself. But
Correct. I mean, knowing that the topic I tend to speak on, which is how to build stronger, longer lasting customer relationships, which is sort of the business outcome, and taking it from the angle of how to bring more love into your work and more love into the vendor to buyer relationship. I spend time looking at what is what is getting spoken about at different conferences and trade shows, any publicly available information where you can find other speakers who talk on topics similar to yours is a valid proof point that, oh, someone is willing to pay to hear this or to invite me in to hear this. And once you know there's an audience for it, then it's a matter of finding your own particular take. And then the hard work begins of actually coming to the attention of the people who book speakers.
Indeed. When it comes to your speaking business, what types of services do you offer?
For the speaking side, it's the traditional motivational keynotes that are also educational, of course, explaining why what I talk about is important. What are the benefits of bringing more of your true self and more love into the relationship with the folks you're selling to and influencing? And then the business payoff. It doesn't so much get into the how to do it, that'll come later, but the keynotes are all about why is this important and let's get motivated to do more of it. Also at conferences, trade shows, and corporate meetings like sales kickoffs or leadership team offsites, I have a series of workshops that I can offer that are really shorter versions generally, very interactive, very exercise driven, but shorter versions of training workshops that I subsequently offer that get deeper and deeper into, all right, how do you do this, and helping people build the skills. So like many speakers, in addition to being booked to speak at a conference or a corporate meeting with a keynote or a breakout, I am a trainer and I am a consultant helping companies crack the code on the stuff that I'm passionate about and have deep history in.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. For the people who are watching or listening, Bryan, and they want to put themselves out there as a professional speaker, what do they need to have in place for them to do so?
Well, there's the attitude and the willingness to do the work, which is what we've been discussing. Have the area where you're passionate, where you develop a unique point of view, and ideally, so you'll be extra memorable when you do share what you know, some sort of a unique hook. I, for example, have the couple of trademarks on the term hippie with an MBA, which I get to play up when I'm in front of an audience, as well as the term lustomer, as in turn your customers into lustomers, implying a stronger, deeper relationship. So have that, but then there's the mechanics of getting into the world of speaking. Like me, you no doubt have a website, a speaker reel of a couple of minutes or less that really talks about how you engage audiences and what it is you teach and why it's important. You probably have some number of one sheets, a general one page, two sides, or these days a PDF version of that, talking about the programs that you offer and offering some testimonials from satisfied clients. In my case, I also have gotten to the point where for each of my keynote offers, as well as for each of the core trainings that I offer, I've created one-page flyers for those as well. So you've got to be ready with, well, and that's the last part, I guess, is make sure that if you are looking to get in front of audiences as a speaker, you've got an answer to the question that you hope gets asked, which is, okay, now that we've heard you and we're all excited about this topic, what's next? Which means eventually putting together a body of trainings or standard consulting services that you can offer. So there's a lot to it, and yet none of it, if you're passionate about your topic, is very hard.
How do you go about finding speaking engagements?
Neil, if I could tell you that, if I could tell you there was one way to do it, I would be doing that much more right now. It's a hodgepodge, honestly, and tell me if you agree. I look to see where other speakers with topics like mine or topics that are adjacent to mine have been speaking. So I follow other speakers' websites and social media. I pay attention to certain industries and begin to get a sense of when they're having their association meetings. And by working with the associations, I regularly get to meet the member organizations and the key decision makers in those. I am a member of the National Speakers Association, and that has generated a number of good referrals for me, as well as people who, even if they can't make a referral, say, I just heard about this conference and you should probably talk to somebody about it. And then I'm fortunate, through a National Speakers Association contact, was referred to a speaking manager, someone who helps organizations book speakers and acts as a clearinghouse for her group of clients, me included. And I regularly hear from her asking if I'd like to have my hat put in the ring for a particular conference. And usually, she will include when it is, where it is, and what kind of revenue it's going to generate for me. And based on if I'm available and if the money sounds right, I'm always ready to hop on a plane or get in the car and get out to the place. So it's all of those methods. That's the hardest part of having a speaking career, is figuring out where you're going to speak next, at least in the early stages. I do know other speakers, and no doubt you do as well, who at this point in their careers, they are having clients find them. They're highly in demand, and the compensation they get for each speech reflects that. Those of us who, a little later in life after my corporate career, am just building my speaking life, I've been much more sought after as a trainer and a consultant to this point in my career. But as I'm beginning to get more speaking engagements, I'm finally starting to find sometimes my phone rings and someone says, I heard about you through someone else, and now I want to talk with you.
You mentioned the idea, or you mentioned speaker manager. And I get the sense that for a lot of people who are entering the speaking business, they may have heard the idea of getting into a speaker bureau. So what's the difference between a speaker bureau and a speaker manager? And for those who are trying to get into those fields, or trying to get into being a professional speaker, what do they need to know about?
Yeah, I guess the first thing to know is, my impression is, this is the thing, you wait for it to come to you. Until you've built a body of work with a lot of feedback that you can share, both qualitative and quantitative, there aren't, unless you've done something in your career, like climbed Everest with your hands tied behind your back, or won an Olympic gold medal, or been a CEO, you are not likely to have a speaker bureau coming to you. If you have, as I did, had a generally normal corporate career and you just have some subject matter expertise, I was introduced, as I started to make the turn to being seen as more of a speaker, I was introduced to a representative or two from bureaus, and their advice to me was, just go out and speak, find your own stuff, and if you're good enough and if you're in demand enough, a bureau will find you, and that's where the synergy starts to happen. And that is what happened with my manager. As for the difference between a manager and a bureau, there's probably something more sophisticated that I'm missing at this point in my career as a professional and primarily as a speaker. But it seems like a manager is the individual and a bureau is something that a speaker manager might belong to if they've decided to throw in with others and have a corporate structure behind them. My manager not only finds engagements for me because she's plugged into certain industries that just know to pick up the phone, and instead of trying to find their own speakers, call her and say, who have you got who has this topic, that knows this industry? And somewhere at the intersection, if she can find somebody, she does. She will also take opportunities that I generate, and I'm able to call her and say, I just want to focus on being the best possible speaker and content deliverer to the client. Would you please work out the financial negotiation? And she and I have, different agreements based on whether she's found the engagement or I have. But either way, she keeps me at arm's length from the financial negotiations, all the stuff that makes my head spin a little bit, so I can focus on building the best relationship I possibly can with my client and making sure that they see me as the hero and not the adversary. That's the real value, I think, of having or that's one of the real values of having a manager or a bureau behind you, is you get to separate so that you can focus on content while they handle the money and logistics side.
Understood. For people who are aspiring to be professional speakers, I suspect that a lot of the work that they're going to have to do up front is reaching out to various places, as you mentioned, to see whether they can go in and to speak at those places. In so many instances, though, you may reach out to someone and not hear back from them. How would you handle following up with places that you've reached out to?
I'm trying to think of the joke that leads to the punchline. Volume, volume, volume. It's I try not to lose too much sleep and take a Zen attitude towards those who don't follow up with me. If they don't know me at all, they don't owe me anything. So if I send out 100 emails or try to make 100 LinkedIn connections to, let's just say, uh, 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 program program chairs for credit union associations, who and credit unions have an association each of the 50 states and all of the various territories, and they always have a conference each year. The ones who don't get back to me, I just keep them on a drip campaign. I can invite them to do something like, if you don't want to talk with me now, perhaps you'd like to get my newsletter. And I just keep reaching out because I know I'm playing a long game here. If I speak at a 2025 conference, 6 conference, 7 conference, 8 conference, it's all good. I spend more of my time worrying about, did I get back quickly enough to the person who actually did respond and express interest? So it's spread the love around, reach out to a lot of folks, and know that you're playing a numbers game and know that you're playing a long game. And then focus on the folks who seem to vibe with you.
Okay, that's a good advice. I know you had mentioned you work with a speaker manager who handles the pricing of your services. But for those who are just starting out, I suspect that that's something that they may have to do on their own. So what are your thoughts, or yeah, what are your thoughts on how they should go about pricing their services?
Uh, Yeah, that's a good one. And tell me, Neil, when you started doing speaking as part of your career, did it begin as speaking to do business development as opposed to looking for a check from it for the first time?
You did.
Yeah, and same here, right? I found organizations like professional organizations, the Society for Human Resource Managers, the Washington Technology Industry Association, uh, chambers of commerce, and Rotary clubs and other civic-minded organizations. They all have regular meetings. They often are looking for speakers. And I went out and I spoke as much as I could for nothing except the opportunity to be in front of the right audience, and then used that to reach the folks who could email or call a day or a week or a year later and say, I saw you at such and such event. I need a speaker now for something, and what do you charge? The first time I got asked to speak and knew that there was an expectation they were going to pay me, I different strokes, right? Or different approaches and different levels of sophistication. I made up a number. I just made up a number that I thought made a certain amount of sense, wouldn't turn them off, and they'd have the ability to say yes to. And when they said yes very quickly, of course, I started scratching my head thinking, maybe I should have asked for more, right? But I was very happy for the opportunity to, for the first time, cash a check to get to do something. Uh, there are speakers like former presidents and secretaries of state and notable business authors who command 100,000 to $250,000 for one speech. In the world of professional speakers who are subject matter experts rather than celebrities, the pinnacle is probably somewhere in the $50,000 to $75,000 a speech range, but that's for the most well-known authors. Inside of the community that you and I connect with, National Speakers Association or Toastmasters, there's a lot of folks who, when they know they're selling something else like training services or consulting on the back end, and that's their primary revenue source, I've spoken for anywhere from $1,000 to $10,000 for an engagement. Once or twice, I've gone a little above. And sometimes I've said, if you just get me into the conference for the 3 days that it's running, I am happy if you just cover my plane and hotel because I know I'm in front of the right audience. So I don't know that that really counts as advice. It's my experience, and being willing to speak a lot so that you can get exposure seems like the main win early on.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. There's a lot of there are a lot of speaker programs that are out there that promise to help aspiring speakers develop their speaking businesses. What are your thoughts on a speaker investing in such a program, and what should they expect from such a program?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, do you allow modestly salty language in your podcast?
Oh, go for it.
Uh it helps to have a pretty finely tuned bullshit detector. Um, there are a lot of people, including professional speakers, who have lots of opinions to share, who are very happy to help other speakers. And some of their programs are good, and some people who are very good at speaking are not necessarily good at sharing what they know in an effective way. I always found that the measure of who I wanted to think about writing a check to was based on, I guess, two things. One, do I vibe with them personally? Not, I don't want someone who's going to simply rub me the wrong way, no matter how smart they are. I need to get along with someone. And I need to trust through what they offer for free, whether it's their newsletter or the intake conversation they might have with you or the exploratory conversation they might ask for when they reach out to you on LinkedIn proposing that, oh, I'm really good at these things. This is what I teach, and come to my boot camp. Do they seem like they're delivering good information? The folks who tend to deliver the foolproof 7-step system to getting more leads or closing deals faster or selling $100,000 contracts, I know they've done something that has worked for them, but every personality is unique, and I don't trust that my personality will always be the best. The single best investment I ever made was with a nonprofit, the National Speakers Association, where pretty much every chapter, at least pre-COVID, there things have changed a little since the pandemic as everything moved to, for a period of time, moved to virtual. Before the pandemic, pretty much every chapter had its own version of what the National Speakers Association calls an academy. And when I invested in that here in the Pacific Northwest back in 2019, just the year before the pandemic, I got across 5 Saturdays spread over 5 months, multiple speakers from within the chapter each day telling us their personal stories of how they craft a speech, how they think about creating what should go, putting into a speaker reel, what should go into it, putting into a one pager, what should go into it, helping think of slogans and trademarks, and then the whole business side, how to run accounting, how to create products that you can sell after, and how to be effective at selling after. And because it was volunteers and because it was advice from practitioners without anybody promising a special foolproof method, it really did good. It also created some lifelong connections, several of which now have paid off for me with referrals into speaking engagements. And likewise, I have referred several of the people I met through that program into speaking engagements when I knew they would hit it out of the park for the client. I have figured out for myself my own deficits as a speaker. I feel like I come across very often more professorial and less motivational speaker. And I'd like to punch up my humor and my enthusiasm on stage. So I've worked with people who I think are the funniest people I know, who have a gift for looking at a recording that I've had created by a client of a presentation I've made to their group and starting to work with me on, well, here's a place where you could use a line like this and it would work. So I've started developing a standard pattern for some portions of my presentations. That to me is a good investment. But get out there and just speak first, with the exception of something like an academy through NSA, where it's explicitly meant for first-time speakers. Don't invest money in foolproof systems for prospecting better or building your value ladder or whatever it is someone might call it.
Yeah.
Is that helpful? Does that
Oh,
make
yeah.
sense?
Yes, that's sound advice. Bryan, I
Oh, if
mentioned
I could add one more thing to that.
Go ahead.
As you can tell, I have opinions and some experience. I am also not at the pinnacle of my career as a speaker, at least I hope not. Bryan with a Y, as you can see if you're watching this on YouTube instead of just listening, but Bryan with a Y at bryanrutberg.com. Send me a note. I'm happy to talk with anybody about how they can begin their speaking career or whatever stage they're at. If I've walked that path, I'm the hippie, right? I'm the one who wants to show love to everybody. Come, let me show you a little love and tell you what I've experienced and answer your questions.
Excellent. And sound advice. I mentioned in the intro that you worked with a marketing GM to prepare a speech for a data analyst audience. I'm curious, how did the data analyst audience receive the speech?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite stories, which is why you heard it the first time we talked, because it just naturally suggested itself based on the very good work that you do. I had the privilege of having a client for many years until he reached the end of his time with the corporation that he was with. And we worked on all sorts of public speaking and presentations for him. And as a marketing general manager, he was in a role where he was managing a massive internet property for one of the best known companies on the planet. And that meant that he was always receiving data, and he became a real data head around it. He needed to know the numbers. He needed to share the numbers with his leadership team. And while he had grown up on the what's the message and how do we communicate it side of the business, he quickly learned that you couldn't run a business like the one he was expected to run without really digging into the numbers. And he ended up being asked to join the board of the Data Analysts Association, or DAA. And it was for a speech to a group of data analysts, early to mid-career, that he was asked to prepare remarks on how do you get heard inside of the business heads in the organization, because data always is serving a business purpose and it's supposed to shed light on the business outcomes that you're trying to drive. We put together a presentation that proposed to get inside the mind of the person who would be listening to data analysts. And the one key takeaway was, one slide that represented maybe 5 to 10 minutes of his presentation, called "4 That Score in the C-Suite." And it was the 4 things that we proposed to the data analysts. They needed to be able to translate their data into driving outcomes in one of these 4 key areas. Those were the ability to drive revenue and take market share, the ability to reduce cost and therefore increase profit, and maintaining and increasing customer satisfaction and loyalty, and employee satisfaction and loyalty. And what we put out there was leaders care about these four things. Make sure that your data is always presented in service to one of these outcomes, because that's the language that leaders respect and respond to. And I won't say the crowd went wild. These are data analysts after all. But the conversation that he and I, because I had the privilege of attending the presentation, the conversation that he and I heard in hallways afterwards, and the people who came up to him to ask questions later, and who I know followed up with him even in the weeks after the event, showed that, yeah, this had really cracked into the heads of these data analysts. These were the geeks, to use your parlance, that responded to understanding, how do I get my message across? Because we all have the same goal when we're in a business. These data analysts wanted to be heard and wanted to have an impact on the business. And how do you have an impact if you're used to working in the numbers and used to working in the geeky areas? You translate it into language that gets to money in the door, money flowing through to the bottom line, and the two most important things in any business: the customers you serve and the employees who work with you to make it all happen.
Nice. Well, this has been a great
Yeah.
conversation. Thank you so much for being a guest, Bryan. And Bryan already mentioned how you can get in touch with him. You can go to Bryan@BryanRutberg.com. Again, that's Bryan@BryanRutberg.com. I certainly will have that in the show notes. And everybody, that marks the end of another edition of Teach the Geek interviews. My name is Neil Thompson. I'm the founder of Teach the Geek. I work with technical professionals so they can present more effectively, especially in front of non-technical audiences. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to teachthegeek.com. Again, that's teachthegeek.com. Until next time, take care and stay safe. Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you, Neil. What a pleasure.